We're going to jump into part 4 of our series, Pillow Talk, God's Guide to Love, Sex, and Marriage. And if you were not with us last week, I would encourage you to jump online and catch last week's message as Stacy and I spent about 50 minutes talking about God's Guide to Healthy Sexuality and Intimate Expression. We think it's really helpful for those of us who are interested in that area, which is most likely all of us. And so also think it's really helpful if you're a parent to sit down with your teenager and walk through that content as well. And what I find so interesting about Song of Songs, this study that we're in over the next 5 weeks, is that it's 8 chapters of songs written by Solomon that tell this beautiful story, really like a Broadway musical, between a lover, a woman, and her man. And it's this beautiful picture that starts with their attraction in the first couple of chapters, to their dating relationship in the following chapters, then to their marriage, and then to their honeymoon that we talked about last week. And now we get to this coming week, and the reality lays out before us that they get into their first fight. Now, I find it interesting that there are 8 chapters in Song of Songs, and over 2 of them are dedicated just to the fight. How many of us can say a good amen to 25% of the relationship is an argument, right? That's the way in which this thing works out. And I love the rawness and the realness of what we're going to look at here as we talk about what it means to be people that experience and walk through conflict God's way. Now, before we jump into that, I want to remind you of the 2 rules that we've got for this entire series that are absolutely essential if we're going to walk out of here with any hope whatsoever. And the first one is this, is that as I talk about conflict, as we talk about fights and arguments, we want to listen for us, not the person next to you. So you want to listen for you, not the person next to you. There will be moments today when you're going to find me saying something and you'll be like, I wish so-and-so believed that. If they just did that, everything would be better. So say this with me, say, it's not about them. Oh, y'all, see, you're not convinced. You're not convinced. Ready? It's not about them. It's about me. All right. Some of y'all believe that. Some of you don't. All right. But that's it. Here's the second one, okay? We're not looking back because we are new creations. Can I just get a big sound and a great sense of praise and thankfulness that God is a God of fresh starts, not a God who holds us back to what's been in our past, but he's looking forward. Are we thankful for that kind of God this morning? That's the kind of God that we worship. That's the kind of God that we're with. And so there are going to be moments in this series and really in today when you're going to want to look back. And I want to encourage you to look forward with hope and with faith that if you implement these principles that we're talking about today, you're going to experience God's best for your life. So we're going to answer this question today. What do we do? What do we do with conflict? Because conflict is inevitable. Whether or not you're married, you're dating, you're single, and you've got roommates, or if you're at the workplace, all of the principles we talk about today will apply, even though this story is in the context of a marital relationship. And here's what you need to know. Conflict is not the problem. How we handle it can be. In fact, conflict is inevitable. There's no doubt about that. And healthy conflict can lead to a healthier relationship. How you handle conflict will be the determining factor on the kind of relationships that you have. The goal is not to avoid conflict. The goal is not to just manage conflict, but the goal is to work through and walk through conflict in a way where both people are better at the end. Now, I don't know about you, but have you ever been in a situation where you've been in a fight with somebody and you find yourself arguing and tensions have raised and maybe voices have raised and, you start throwing out ammunition from, all the stuff that you've got, ready to go, all the history and all the past. And it's just kind of throwing the kitchen sink at people. And then you recognize midway through the argument, somebody says this, what are we even fighting about? Anybody been there before, right? It's like the argument is escalated. You don't even know why you are arguing, but here we are. Yelling at each other, not in love, ready to slam the door, wishing that we never made the decision in the first place, right? We've all been in this place before. We've asked this question, how do we get here? How did we get here? How did we get to a place in our relationship where we're literally 2 ships passing in the night? How did we get to a place where it was a honeymoon and it was romantic and now we're just glorified roommates? How did it get to a point where we don't even talk to each other anymore, or seeing that person at the office just makes us bristle? How did we get here? We're gonna answer that question today. And here's the second question. How can we get out? I hope this is the question that you're asking. I mean, how do I get out of this death spiral of conflict and arguments and fighting and avoidance and feeling like I'm not connected with the people that I'm supposed to be connected with? Well, there is a way forward. But I want you to know that that way forward is going to take a lot of willingness on our part to change the way that we even see conflict in general. So write this down. The goal of conflict isn't resolution. Let me tell you that right now. The goal of conflict is not resolution. And if you've been thinking about conflict, we just need to get this resolved. We just need to get this settled. You have actually set yourself up for failure. Dr. John Gottman is just an incredible researcher on marriage and on conflict in particular and what makes a marriage thrive. And he says that 69% of arguments in marriage are not able to be resolved. Merry Christmas, everybody. That 70% of the things that we argue about, 70% of the things that we just get frustrated about with our spouse or with a friend, they're not going to come to a resolution. Because the way that they see the world is so different than the way that we see the world. You ever been in this situation before where you look at somebody and you just think, how are you the way that you are? Why do you believe what you do? You ever scrolled through your Facebook feed and thought, there are real live idiots in the world. Like, how do they think this way? And while you're doing that, they're looking at your feed saying, that person's an idiot, right? Like, there's no way around it. Because at the end of the day, we have a perspective, and the majority of our ways of living and the way that we see the world, that stuff's determined before we graduate high school, all right? So you take two people in a marriage who have two very different worldviews, two very different backgrounds, put them in the same room, and guess what? Conflict's gonna happen. And 7 times out of 10, there is no actual resolution that will ever occur, which is why you have the same fights over and over and over again. It's why you thought it was resolved the last time, but it's still there 20 years later. So the goal of conflict, hear me, is not resolution. It is something far greater and far harder. Write this down in your notes. The goal of conflict isn't resolution. It is reconciliation. Reconciliation is about relationship. Reconciliation is about unity and connectedness and oneness. And that is the ultimate goal. So I'm going to answer 2 questions today. How did we get here? How did we get to this place in our relationship where we're arguing all the time, or where we don't want to see each other, or why we just have these kind of visceral reaction when it comes to a person in our workplace, or our roommates, or maybe our spouse, or even our parents? How did we get here? And we'll answer the second question, how do we get out? Well, Song of Songs helps us out a lot. In chapter 5, verses 2, we see a layout happen, a relational blow-up happen that maybe you can resonate a little bit with, okay? They've come back from their honeymoon. They've had a really great time. They're now newly married and enjoying life together. And we pick up in verse 2, and this is what we find. She speaks first, and she says, I slept, but my heart was awake. What that means is she's in bed trying to go to sleep, but she's not really sleeping. You know what I mean? She's a little bit frustrated. She's a little bit irritated. She had an expectation for the way that the night was going to go, and that expectation has not been met by her husband. We understand why in the next couple of words. This is what says. He speaks, and she says, listen, my beloved is knocking. So she's in bed trying to go to sleep. The door's locked, and he knocks on the door. And it's very clear based upon the way that he's speaking that he's interested in one thing and one thing alone. He says this, open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. He is laying it on thick, isn't he? He listened to the message I preached last week and he's trying to employ that. That's what he's doing right here. He said, my head is drenched with dew, my hair with the dampness of the night. So here's what's happened. It's late at night. She is gone to bed trying to go to sleep. He comes to the door and he's trying to, step into some, great marital bliss, if you will. He's knocking on the door and he's like, hey, boo, you there? You awake? What's going on? Maybe I can modernize this a little bit for us. Imagine it this way. This has never happened to me, but maybe it's happened to you before. Husband and wife have a conversation. Wife looks at husband and says, baby, it's been a long time since you've spent time with the fellas. Why don't you go out and I know there's a Thursday night card game. Go play the Thursday night card game. Just have fun with your friends. But just make sure that you're home, around, 8:30 or so. I've got some dessert for us and some extra dessert, if you know what I'm saying, right? Like that kind of conversation, all right? So he's feeling great. I mean, he's getting to go hang out with his boys. It's going to be a great night. So he looks at her and he says, baby, I know that it's been a while since you've been able to hang out with the girls. Why don't you take my credit card, go to Publix, grab yourself a couple of vinos, grab the girls, bring them over, throw on Netflix, watch the Great British Baking Show or whatever show you want to watch that I don't want to watch anyway, right? Get the girls together, have a good time, make sure they're out of the house by 8:30, we'll rendezvous, I'll put the Boys to Men on and we'll have a good time, all right? They kiss and they part ways. So he's out playing cards with the guys, it's a good time. 8 o'clock rolls around, and he's just getting whooped. He's losing his money. And he's thinking, man, I've got to get this money back. I'm just a couple more rounds, I'll be good. So 8:15 rolls by. He looks at the clock, and he's like, okay, I can wrap this up. I'll only be a couple minutes late. And then he loses even more. And now the guys are making fun of him. He's like, oh, you're married now. I don't know how to play poker anymore, man, right? Now he's feeling this kind of deal where the guys are riding him. And so he stays longer. All of a sudden, he looks up, and he recognizes, oh, my gosh, I'm so late. I'm super late. So he rushes home. And by this time, she had, gotten, the dessert ready. She'd had the cute outfit on. She had the music playing, had the candles on. He's not come home. He hasn't even called. So she blows out the candles. She walks into the room, locks the door hurt, and goes to bed. He gets home, and he has the option to acknowledge what he's done wrong, but instead he just tries to lay it on thick and pretend like nothing has happened. And she is not in the mood. This has never happened in your marital relationship, right? Where one person's interested in a little bit of intimacy and the other person isn't, right? It always works out perfectly, I'm sure, right? No, that's the layout here, okay? So he's coming to bed trying to make the night end well in his mind, and she is not interested at all. So he says, will you let me in? Now she, in verse 3, turns to the audience. Remember, this is a Broadway musical. And she wants to gain our sense of connectedness and kind of lean in with us. And this is what she says to the audience. She says, I've taken off my robe. Must I put it on? Now imagine if you're the guy knocking on the door and your wife is saying, hey, I already took off my robe. I can't put it on. That just adds insult to injury, doesn't it? She says, I've washed my feet. Must I soil them again? Meaning, I'm already in bed. I've already taken care of everything that needs to happen tonight. I'm not getting up to unlock this door. So what does he do? She says in verse 4, my beloved thrust his hand through the latch opening, meaning he slams the door out of frustration. She says, my heart began to pound for him. Verse 5, I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers with flowing myrrh on the handles of the bolt. I opened for my beloved, verse 6, but my beloved had left. He was gone. My heart sank at his departure. I looked for him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. So this is what's happened, okay? This is how the conflict has arose. There was an expectation that she had for the night that was set by both of them, but her experience did not meet her expectation, and so she filled that gap, not with trust, not with goodwill, but with frustration, with resentment. He comes, not in a place of humility, doesn't own his stuff, doesn't acknowledge what is wrong, pretends like everything's okay, doesn't admit that he had made a mistake. And so she says, you know what? If you're going to hurt me, I'm going to hurt you too. This is closed for business, ain't happening tonight. I'm not going to even let you in the room. You're not going to even get into the room with me today. I'm going to withhold my presence from you. So he gets angry, slams the door, and what does he say? Well, if you're going to be that way, I'm just going to walk off. So eventually she gets up, and guess who's not there? Her man. So how do we get here? How do we get into conflict? Well, let me submit to you that the majority of our conflict look a lot like this, whether or not it's with roommates or with our kids or in our marriage. It's what Emerson Eggerichs calls the crazy cycle, and it works this way, is that usually somebody starts it off. They respond without love. Usually he responds without love. It was unloving for him to not communicate to her what was going on. So she responds without respect. If you're not going to love me, I'm not going to respect you. The respectful thing would have been for her to get up and at least let the man into his own bedroom. So he responds without love. If you're not going to get up, then I'm going to walk away. And many of us are in crazy cycles just like this. We get hurt, so we hurt back. So they hurt us back because they got hurt by us. So then we hurt them again. And then we end up in a spinning cycle, a tornado of disrespect and dishonor and lack of love, to the point where if we do not cut it out, eventually we look at the other person, and the person who we said promises to, who we thought we would love forever, becomes the person who we cannot stand. And I would submit to you that the majority of your fights, the majority of the conflict in your marriage or in your friendships or in your roommate relationships have to do with this. Have to do with somebody initiated the hurt, and that other person, instead of responding with kindness and grace, initiated hurt again. And when another person gets hurt, it just becomes a vicious downward cycle. And some of you are right there right now. Some of you have been avoiding hard conversations in your marriage because you're in this cycle right now. Some of the most regretful decisions you've ever made is because you were in that cycle. Some of the most shameful statements and words you never thought you would ever say to the person you say you love the most in the world happened because of that situation right there. And man, when you're in that crazy cycle, it is hard to get out. It is hard to know up from down. Everything seems to be a blur, and it is really, really difficult to break through. So how do we get out? How do we get off of this crazy cycle and into a rhythm of reconciled relationship? Well, what I love about Song of Songs is that we have a story laid out for us that gives us the principles. Now, I want to tell you this right now, okay? If you're in the middle of conflict or if relationship is hard for you right now, there is a way out, but like many good things in life, the way out is not an easy way. And you've got to make a decision today to make some choices for the sake of your relationship, to be the person who says, regardless of what you do, I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that we stop this crazy cycle. Because here's what's at stake. If you're a parent, what's at stake is the way that your kids see the world and the way that they see God, because they see God through your marriage and through your relationship. If you're roommates, what's at stake is the friendship with people that you say that you care about the most. If you're in your office, what's at stake is maybe your job. I can't tell you how many people I know that have lost their jobs or not been able to step up into higher levels of leadership because of their emotional immaturity and unwillingness to be somebody who steps out of the crazy cycle. So, how do we get out? I'm going to give you 5 choices that you need to make today. The first one is this: you need to choose to pursue. Write this down in your notes. Choose to pursue. So she gets up out of bed. She goes to go look for her man, opens the door, and he's not there. And at this point, she is justified, right, to get right back in bed and go to sleep, right? Can I get a good amen on that? Like, isn't she justified? I mean, this guy was late. He didn't call. He didn't communicate. He hasn't said, I'm sorry yet. He slammed the door, and then he walked out. If there's any person who's justified in this relationship to say, well, do you? I'm going to go back to bed and enjoy my sleep. It is this woman. But she doesn't do that. She chooses to pursue him. And it comes at an incredible cost. Remember, this is a Broadway musical, so at this point, the music is beginning to crescendo. She stepped out into the city, and she's looking for her man. She's left her home. It's dark outside. It's at nighttime. It's probably early in the morning, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and she's going out into the city to find her man. This is what we find in verse 7. It says that the watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city. And look at this. They beat me. They bruised me. They took away my cloak, those watchmen of the walls. Meaning this woman walks out into the city and she actually experiences some incredible pain from other people because of the pursuit that she has laid out. Now, this is a pretty kind of unfortunate situation. This is deeply sad, this image that we get here of a woman who's being taken advantage of. It is incredibly, incredibly horrendous. It points to the fact that this reality about women being taken advantage of in culture has always been a part of our story, and it's always our responsibility to be protectors and to be people who lift women up and honor them. But she's out there by herself. And while this is an image that is very, very real, there's also a metaphor here that's huge. Imagine the Broadway musical, the lights are going crazy, she's being beaten and disheveled, and then the lights come back up, and she still hasn't found her man. And what I find here metaphorically is something that's so valuable, is that when you choose to pursue the person that has wounded you, you will experience pain. Isn't that real? The choice to go and pursue a person that has hurt you does not come without emotional pain and hurt. Hear me. The cost of going first when relationship is broken is that you will feel hurt, you will feel wounded, and you will feel vulnerable. It is inevitable. Which begs the question, why in the world would I ever do it? You'll feel wounded, hurt, and vulnerable just like Jesus was for you. If you're a follower of Jesus, the reason why you go first isn't because it feels good. If you're a follower of Jesus, the reason why you go first isn't because it makes you feel like the better person. The reason why you go first is because that's the exact pattern that God has laid out for the way that he relates to me and you. God did not wait on us. He went first, didn't he? I mean, imagine this situation in an environment where God, if he decided the only way he was going to relate to us is when we got our acts figured out. Anybody tracking with that? Could you imagine if the way that it worked in our relationship with God is God would say, hey, until you apologize for all the bad stuff you've done, I'm not even going to pay attention to you. How terrible a situation would that be? That is not the picture we have. God comes to us, we spit on him, crucify him, mock him, and make fun of him. And he says, Father, forgive them because they do not know what they're doing. So if you're not a follower of Jesus, you don't have to step into this at all. But I also want you to know if you're not a follower of Jesus, this is the heart of God towards you, is that he goes to you first. And if you are a follower of Jesus, if you've said, I submit my life to him, then that means that every single situation where you feel like you've been wronged or where there's conflict, you're not waiting on the other person to come to you. You take the courageous step to go first. John Bevere puts it this way. He says, a person who cannot forgive has forgotten how great a debt God has forgiven them. So I want to ask you this question today. Every single choice will come with a question. And this is a practical question I want you to utilize in the midst of conflict when you're trying to decide if you're going to go first. It's this question, okay? And write it down if you're courageous enough. Is my excuse preventing me from going first better than God's? You get that? Is my excuse for not going first to reconcile this relationship better than the excuse that God would have for not going to reconcile with me? I'll tell you the answer. You're never going to have a better excuse. If there's anyone in the world and anyone in all of human history that had the right to decide not to go towards you, it would be the creator of the universe who has done nothing wrong at all. Because here's what I know. In most conflict, it's not just one person who's wrong, right? It's both of us. Maybe we didn't start it, but we sure finished it, didn't we? We sure said some things that we shouldn't have said. We sure acted some ways that we shouldn't have acted. And so our decision, especially if you're a follower of Jesus, is you've got to choose to pursue. That's the first choice you've got to make. Here's the second choice. You've got to choose to honor. And I would say that this one right here is both the preventative medicine that will help you manage conflict and really experience reconciliation in your life. That has nothing to do with just the moment of being in conflict, but is also the thing that is necessary to help you honor the people that you're in relationship with. And I would say honor is one of the most necessary principles as being a follower of Jesus that are missed in Christian culture today. Here's what honor is and what it looks like. In verse 8, she goes and she says this. She grabs her women, the people that have been with her, and she says, daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, if you find my beloved, I'm looking for my man, what will you tell him? And she said, tell him I'm faint with love. So she gathers her friends and she says, would you help me go find my man? And if any of you find him, let him know that I love him. To which the girlfriends say, hold on. Wasn't he late? Look at what their response is. How is your beloved better than the others? Most beautiful of women. How is your beloved better than the others that you so charge us? Meaning, wait, you want us to tell him that you love him? You want us to tell him that you forgive him? I mean, wasn't he late tonight? Like, didn't you work really hard to cook that filet mignon, medium rare, just the way he likes it? Get those sweet potatoes just the way he likes it with a little bit of butter and sugar and cinnamon on top. Didn't you get his favorite red wine? Didn't you light the candles just right? Didn't you do all of this work for him? And he was late and he didn't even call? And you want us to just go and say that everything's okay? Give me a reason, is what they're saying, as to why we should treat him this way. And look at her response. She says, my beloved is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. His head is purest gold. His hair is wavy and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by the water streams, washed in milk, mounted like jewels. His cheeks are like beds of spice, yielding perfume. His lips are like lilies dripping with myrrh. His arms are rods of gold set with topaz. His body is like polished ivory decorated with lapis lazuli. His legs are pillars of marble set on bases of pure gold. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as its cedars. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. That is a Facebook post right there, is it not? Look what she does. If there's anyone who has the right to speak bad about her man, it is her. And she's with her girlfriends who are saying, girl, why don't you just tell us the real story? Like, why aren't we venting a little bit? Why aren't we just, talking a little bad about your man? And then she says this is my beloved. This is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem. She chooses, look at me, to speak with honor about her man. Now, if you go to chapter 6, he's out in the wilderness, kind of out in his yard, kind of doing his own thing. They're not connected yet. But when he thinks about her, I want you to see what he says, because he speaks with honor about her too. He says this. He says, your hair is like a flock of goats descending from Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep coming up from the washing. Each has its twin. None of them is missing. Which, if you notice, is exactly what he said in chapter 4, right? You know why? Because men are not creative. And if it worked the first time, we're going to trust it's going to work again. But notice, there is conflict between them. There is hurt and pain between them. She is wounded because he did not show up. He is wounded because she did not show up for him. And when they could have the right to speak negatively about one another, they choose honor. In the 10 years this summer that I've been married to Stacy, I have never heard Stacy in public ever say something dishonoring about me to somebody else. And unfortunately, when I do premarital counseling, I can almost determine the health and length of a marriage based upon how people speak about one another in that counseling session. And when people are more convinced that the issue is with that person and not with them, there is a clock on that relationship. Because if we can't learn how to speak honoring of the other, focusing on what is good about our partner as opposed to the things that are broken about them, until our hearts are more broken by our own sin, our own wrongdoing in the relationship, than it is how we're being hurt by another person, our relationship will not last. And honor is the practice that allows us to recognize God's good in the person that he has given us. Whether or not that be our spouse, our roommate, our boss. The choice to honor is the key that unlocks God's favor in your life. Hear me. God doesn't honor dishonor. And I think that so many of us are struggling in our relationships. So many of us are struggling in our occupation. So many of us are struggling in our marriages because we don't buy into this principle. We think it's okay to speak negatively about people in our lives. We think it's okay to gossip about others. And God is very clear. You will not receive his favor and blessing if you choose to live that way. The things that you want the most will not come your way if you choose dishonor. In fact, Peter, a guy who walked with Jesus for years, writes in his letter to a group of churches later on, after Jesus has gone forward and given the disciples, the followers of Jesus, this task of sharing with the whole world his good news, writes in a letter this poignant text that I think is so valuable and powerful. And it's just one place where we see it throughout the scriptures. And if you're a man, particularly if you're a husband, maybe struggling with where you are in your organization, maybe struggling with why you feel like God isn't connected close to you, why you don't feel close to God, it could be because of what Peter writes here. Look at how explicit he says. He says this: husbands must give honor. All of the men, on the count of three, I want you to say give honor. 1, 2, 3. Give honor to your wives. That means to value her higher than yourself. Treat your wife with understanding, meaning she's going to do a bunch of crazy you don't get, all right? Try to understand her as you live together. She may be weaker. That means in reference to physical strength, not anything else. She may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. And look what he says at the end. Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. Fellas, God is not going to bless men who dishonor his beloved daughters. He's not going to do it. He might give you a fake version of success, but you'll find a deep sense of emptiness inside of you. And that principle is not just for husbands, it's for wives as well. And because we don't choose honor in our dialogue, because we don't choose honor in our conversation, because we put down one another or speak badly about people when they're not around, don't be surprised that when God's heart, broken and burdened by that, says, I can't trust you with more, because you're not treating what I've given you with the respect and honor that it deserves. So let me ask you this question. In the middle of a fight, in the middle of a conflict, am I choosing to honor what is good or to focus on what is wrong? Let me give you a tangible way. This is a next step that you can take to put this in practice, okay? Write this down in your notes. I want you, just do it for the next week if you can, to write down 3 things that you honor about your spouse or about your coworker or about your boss or about your roommate. 3 things every morning, 3 different things that you honor about them. And then, if it's appropriate, I want you to speak those 3 things to them. And watch what happens in your heart. Because what we'll find is this, is that there are far more better things about the people that God has placed in our lives than there are negative things. But our eyes tend to focus on the negative instead of the positive. So, choose to pursue, choose honor. Here's the third reality, choose community. She leans in back to her friends and she says this in verse 1. She says, where has your beloved gone? This is the community speaking. Most beautiful of women, which way did your beloved turn that we may look for him, look at this, with you? So all of a sudden, because she's spoken with honor about her man, the community around her says, okay, you're serious about this relationship. We're in your corner. We're going to go spread out through the city and we're going to go find him as well. So they're saying, where do you think he is? So then she speaks up in verse 2 and she says this, my beloved has gone down to his garden, to the bed of spices, to browse in the gardens and to gather lilies. Why? Because every time a man is wounded, women, you should pay attention to this. Every time a man is wounded, he goes to the place where he feels validation. So some of the reasons why your man is a workaholic is because he finds validation at the office. Are y'all tracking with me? And he's not finding it at home. Some of the reasons why he's at the golf course all the time is because he finds validation there and he's not finding it somewhere else. For him, he finds validation by mowing the yard, apparently. Not mine, but that's him. So she says, you know what? Based upon the way that I hurt him, he's most likely going to the place where he feels confident and valued and honored. And so he's in the garden. And then she says this in verse 3, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He browses among the lilies. She refrains back and says, I am about him. So the community is saying, how can we go find him with you? Which write down this question I think is an important one if you're going to thrive in a reconciled relationship, is you need friends who care more about your relationship than they care about you. So phrased in a question, do my friends care about my relationship more than they care about me? Some of us have friends we need to get rid of because they care more about you as an individual than they care about your marriage. And they are more than willing to jump in with you and nitpick about what's wrong with your spouse. And you don't need somebody else in the world telling you what's wrong with your spouse. Trust me, you get a front row seat to that every single day. What you need are people who are going to always point you towards the other. Stacey and I have friends like that in our church. There's a couple of friends like that. And one couple in particular that I'm thinking about. I remember a couple of months ago, Stacey and I had a pretty big fight. And we were looking at each other and we're like, we're not going to be able to just figure this out right now. Like, we need to take a breather, and we need to talk with some of our friends, some of our community. And so my wife goes and she, texts with her friend because that's how she does it. And there's a text thread going back and forth about the frustration that's there. And Stacey, even in that conversation, is honoring. She's talking about how she feels, not about what I've done. And her friend texts her back and says, at the end of the day, what matters most is that you two pursue unity. Her friend could have said, man, Colin's a jerk. Let's get together and talk about how terrible he is and call it a prayer time. But they didn't do that. You need friends like that. This is why we're so passionate about community group. We think community group is a place, whether or not you're single or if you're married, that you can process life with people that are going to help you, point you towards relationship, going to point you towards community, going to point you towards oneness. There will be a day when you will be upset. If it hasn't already happened yet, it's going to happen. When you're going to be upset with Nona Church. You're going to be upset about something that I've said, something that happened, a way that you were treated. And if you don't have people in your life that are going to point you towards reconciliation and towards community, you will find yourself isolated and alone. And when you're isolated and alone, that's most likely when the enemy's going to come and take you out. The enemy's goal is to pull us away from community so that he can destroy us. But when we're in community, there's strength in numbers. So get in a group if you are not in a group. Find your people and get rid of the toxic people that are not pointing you towards the relationships that matter most in your life. Here's the fourth choice. You got to choose unity. So they find out where he is, and she begins to say, I'm going to go find him. And so if you can imagine this, anybody seen The Sound of Music? The Hills Are Alive, The Sound of Music. This kind of beautiful picture of like a big rolling green. And he's out there working in the yard, and she's at the top of the hill, and she's making her way down to the valley, to where he is. They haven't seen each other. They haven't talked to each other. They've treated each other with honor. But this is the moment where they're going to reconcile and be face to face. And as she's walking down, we see this in verse 11. She said, I went down to the grove of nut trees to look at the new growth. Meaning, is there hope in this relationship for us to make it right in the valley? To see if the vines had budded or the pomegranates were in bloom. And verse 12 is so powerful. She says this, before I realized it, my desire, meaning her emotions, set me among the royal chariots of the people. Now, we read that term chariot, and all we think of is, a physical chariot. For the readers that were reading this, the chariot was a sign of unity and strength. Whenever you saw a chariot moving through a city, you would see a king and a queen together. And the reason why was the idea that when they were together, they were one. The strength of a nation was built on the unity of the king and the queen running or driving through the city. So here's what she's saying. As I was walking down with all this hurt and woundedness and pain, my emotions changed, and the value that I had now was not being right, not telling him how he had wronged me, but unity and oneness in our relationship. I wanted unity and strength more than I wanted anything else. Now catch this, okay? That is not going to happen unless you choose to pursue, choose to honor, and choose to be in community. Because at the end of the day, if our emotions are the thing that are going to drive whether or not we want unity in a relationship, guess what's going to happen? We're never going to get there, are we? Why? Because when people hurt you, it hurts. So catch this. Her choice to pursue, to live in these principles, to pursue, to honor, and to be in community, those choices transformed her heart. It was not her heart led her to make those choices. It's that her choices drove a change in her heart. See, when you choose to pursue over time, your heart's going to change. When you choose to speak well of your spouse or your roommate or boss, your heart will change. When you choose to be in a community that's not going to tell you what you want to hear, but show you where you've actually been wrong and where you need to own your stuff and how to lift up that relationship, your heart will change. And what you will value more than being right is being one. Here's a principle that we teach in marriage counseling. If one person wins the fight, both people lose in the relationship. If you walk away from a fight feeling like you won, you kind of got that last zinger in, or you had the logical statement that won the day, you didn't win anything except for a fight, and the enemy actually won something far greater. He won your relationship. You've lost the thing that actually matters most. Because if 70% of conflict, 69% of conflict is never going to be resolved, and we feel like we're walking away as the winner, we've actually lost the thing that actually matters most, which is connection and belonging and trust and unity. So, Stacy and I are very competitive people. Any other competitive people in the house? And so sometimes we'll get in fights, and the fight doesn't even become about the issue anymore. It's just about winning the fight, you know what I mean? It's like who can be the wittier person, who can come up with a better logical explanation, Who can win? And one of the principles we've been laying into our relationship that's been really profound for us is that we'll ask this question to ourselves, and sometimes we'll even verbalize it out loud, and it's this question, write it down. Do I want to win this fight, or do I want to win this relationship? In the middle of a fight, ask yourself this question. Do I want to win the fight, or do I want the relationship? Because if you want the relationship, you'll find that a lot of these fights are just not worth fighting. Which leads to the fifth and final choice. You got to choose reconciliation. We don't have time, but all of chapter 7 is this beautiful duet. They enter into the valley. They see each other face to face. He sings to her for like the first 9 or so verses. She sings back to him for the next 5 or so. And it's this beautiful duet. I mean, it's a romantic song. The birds are flying up into the air, right? Like they're spinning in a circle, and it's this beautiful moment. He says incredible things to her. But I want you to see that the goal of relationship is reconciliation. Forgiveness is a solo. See, when she was singing about him in the earlier chapter, she had already forgiven him. In chapter 6, when he was speaking well about her, he had already forgiven her. But they had sung those songs in 2 separate places. Are you getting me? Now they're together, and these solos become a duet. Forgiveness is a solo. Reconciliation is a duet. And the things that they said that were honoring of the other person when that person wasn't around, they turn to one another now face to face and say. They verbalize their heart towards the other person. And that's the goal of relationship. So despite the conflict, we honor the person. He says this in Song of Songs chapter 7 verse 6. He says, how beautiful you are and how pleasing my love with your delights. And she responds, verse 11, come my beloved, let us go to the countryside. Let us spend the night in the villages. Meaning, let's get away. Let's rent a hotel. And let's make what was wrong right. And that's the pathway of reconciliation. You see, the issue in the beginning of the story was unmet expectations. Her heart was broken. His heart was broken. Their experience did not meet the expectation, and they filled that gap with resentment. And it could have been very easy for them to simply say, I'm sorry, let's move on with life. But that's not reconciliation. Reconciliation is doing what you can to make it right for the person that you've wronged. And so, she says, I withheld something from you that I shouldn't have withheld. I treated you a way that I shouldn't have treated you. Let's go and make this right. So here's the pathway of reconciliation. And here's the challenge I want to leave all of you with. Think about that argument that you've had. Think about that conflict you've got in a relationship, maybe at your workplace, maybe at your house, maybe in your marriage. And I'm going to challenge you to walk in the way of Jesus today. And I'm going to ask you to not wait. Don't wait for the other person to come. They may never come. They may not even have known that they hurt you. Don't wait, but go. Here's the second reality. Own your part. Most of the time, when there's conflict, both people have things that they've done wrong. Start with you, not with the other person. Start with you, not with the other person. And lastly, do what you can to make it right. You may never be able to do it perfectly, but do what you can to make it right. Some of you right now in this room have a person you need to make it right with. Some of you right now have a person that you have been waiting for them to come to you, and you need to go. You need to make it right. Some of you have not owning your part to play in the issue, and you need to go and make it right. Because at the end of the day, God's invitation is to a greater way of living. It's not, do I want to resolve conflict? That's not the question. It's, do I want to reconcile the relationship? So I want to give you 2 next steps, and the next steps today are really in the form of 2 questions I want you to process. And I want you to process them here in just a moment as we're about to sing a song that is going to be sung over you. But 2 questions for you to maybe talk about in community group or over lunch with a friend or with your spouse. Here's the first question. What are you avoiding that you need to be owning? Maybe you're avoiding a sin pattern in your life that you know is a real thing that you just need to own. I'm an angry person. Hey, I'm argumentative. Hey, I'm arrogant and prideful, and I don't like to lose, and so I fight until I wear you out. Own that. Stop avoiding it. And here's another question that I think is super important for today. Who do you need to stop trying to fix and instead start trusting them with God? I'm trying to fix my spouse. Colin, if you just knew how terrible he was. Yeah. Are you trying to fix him, or are you allowing God to do the work? Oh, my kid is crazy. Like I've got to. Are you trying to fix them, or are you allowing God to do the work? If you knew my boss and how terrible my boss, listen, are you trusting God to be the one to do it? Because you don't have the tools to do it on your own, but you serve a God who can do anything. So choose to pursue. Choose the process of laying down your rights and honoring the other person. Choose community. Choose unity. It's not about being right. It's about having the relationship. And choose reconciliation, because that's exactly what God chose for you.